Welcome to Facing the Canon. My guest on the programme is Dr. Lucy Peppiatt, author, speaker and president of Westminster Theological Centre. Lucy, welcome to Facing the Canon.
Thank you, J.John.
Let's start with where did you grow up?
Oh, well, I grew up in Wimbledon.
Yes.
Until I was 12, actually. So I didn't have all my childhood in Wimbledon. And then we moved to the US.
Yes.
And so then we had 4 years there in New York State. Then we moved back. My parents kept their house. So in fact, they had that house in Wimbledon all my life, which was amazing. Then I was 16, went to a boarding school for 2 years, and then went to uni and then moved back to London. So I think of London really as kind of my home.
Yes.
Yeah.
A little bit like me, really.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And did you grow up in a Christian home?
I did grow up in a Christian home, but my parents weren't really evangelical. They were both quite quiet people. Well, no, my dad wasn't quiet at all. He was quite quiet about his faith.
Yes.
And so we didn't say grace every meal, but we would have like grace at special occasions. And then my dad would just pray beautifully. But he liked a quieter service. He chose the Anglican church that they went to, and Mum thought it was important to be where he was happy. And I think, but she had a more kind of charismatic expression of faith. So she would pray in tongues, and she believed in healing. And so, yes, I was brought up in a Christian home, but not in a kind of classically evangelical one.
And then when you were 18, you went off to university.
Yeah.
You didn't really want to be a practicing Christian.
No, I didn't. I think from probably about 16, I was thinking, I don't know. And then I got to uni and I just didn't relate to the evangelicals at uni. And I felt a bit hounded by them.
Yes.
I was sort of thinking, I'd rather be left alone. But I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to kind of give everything over to Jesus. And I knew that was the deal. I think I knew enough to know that was the deal. And I definitely believed in God, and I would occasionally go to church. But I had not given my life to Jesus.
No. And when you graduated, you then went to work with homeless people run by nuns.
Yes.
Well, how did you from English graduate, end up working with homeless people with nuns?
Yeah, well, when I was at uni, I found myself being sort of gripped, I suppose, more by justice issues. I think I felt the inequality of the world weighed heavy on me, and I had come from a very privileged background, and I just thought, I can't sit around reading books all day. I'd done my English degree, and I'd got a bit bored by the end of it, and I thought, I want to do something really practical and really, kind of literally, I guess, get my hands dirty and do something for people who have nothing. And I did some voluntary work at the Passage Day Centre, which is an absolutely wonderful, it's still going in Victoria, brilliant group of people, St Vincent de Paul. And they offered me a full-time job. And I took it. So I worked there for 3 years after I left uni. And I loved them. I loved the nuns. And I actually that was part of my journey of coming to my own deeper faith. And
then you had a trip to Kenya.
I did,
and
yes.
That was quite significant in your journey of faith.
It was very significant, yes. So my uncle is a vicar, wonderful, wonderful man, Martin Peppiatt. He's my dad's younger brother.
Who I know.
Who you know.
Yes.
And lots of people know.
Yes.
And his son David was working out there. David's 4 years younger than me.
Yeah.
And I wanted a holiday. I just thought, I'll go on holiday. And Davey's out in Kenya, I'll go and see him. And so we sort of made a plan. And Martin happened to be visiting at the same time. So we had, I think I'm not sure we had all 3 weeks together. I don't think we did. I think we overlapped for a week maybe. And Martin and Davey and I just had a blast. We just had the best time. And I spent time with white Christians who had gone to do sort of short-term mission there, and then these amazing Kenyan Christians.
Yes.
And I felt like I hadn't really encountered Christianity like that before. Maybe I had, but it felt new. It felt really authentic. It felt loving and deep. And I began to feel like a sort of envy of what they had. You know, I looked
there was,
at...
I'm assuming, a lot of expression of joy.
Yes, and singing, you know, so much singing and just so much love and affection. And it really drew me in. It just had a huge impact on me and I loved it. And also we laughed so much. We just laughed all the time. I don't know, it was just a lot of joy.
And when would you say for you, Lucy, was the moment you connected with Jesus?
Well, I would say that it was beginning then.
Yes.
So I would say definitely there was it was like sort of going in deeper and deeper and deeper over the space of a number of years. But the really decisive moment was when I was... So my Davey and then a friend I'd met in Kenya invited me to a Holy Spirit Day. And I heard a testimony from a woman who became a great friend of ours, Sonia Arnold, who sadly died in her 50s. But she gave a testimony of how she had given her life to Jesus when she was 7 years old. And I listened to that and I thought, I've never done that. You know, I've had this sort of peripheral relationship. I felt like I'd been on the edges with God. Yeah. But never actually gone all in. No. And I thought, I've got to do that now. I've waited long enough.
So Lucy, giving my life to Jesus, how would you unpack that? It's a form of surrender?
Yes, I would say completely that. So I would say that I think I understood, because I had been on the edges of, you know, evangelical faith really for many years and had a bit of a, you know, ambivalent relationship with it. But I thought, well, it's time to stop faffing around. And if I have to become like those people, I will do that for God. And I thought, I can't hold anything back. I can't say, because that's what I've been doing for years, you know, sort of saying, well, you can have that little bit or that little bit, but not that, not that, not that. Don't come in there. And
that basically changed the trajectory of your life.
Everything.
Because obviously a transformation took place.
Yes. It felt very decisive. You know, it did feel like I had gone from this to that. But it was also a journey. It was both. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
It was both.
It's a journey. It's a process.
Yeah.
But there's also a crisis.
A moment. Exactly.
There is a moment.
There was a moment.
You then started attending that particular church, where the minister was Nick. And you heard the Lord say you're going to marry him.
I did. Yes, I did.
Well, so what happened?
Well, it was May. So I had gone to this meeting in February. And I had very distinct experience of just feeling like God was speaking to me really quite quickly. I mean, straight away. And I didn't really question it. I believed it was God. It tallied with everything that I already knew about him. And it tallied with the scriptures that I was reading, which I started reading. And I was walking out of church and I got to the Lich Gate. And I just felt God said to me, you're going to marry Nick Crawley. And I didn't really know him at all. So I turned around and went back.
Went back in?
Yeah, to have another look.
To have another look?
Yeah, I did, because I was like, well, I don't know who he is. So I went back and I thought he looked absolutely lovely. I mean, I'd heard him preach.
You sure?
a couple of times. We didn't know each other.
But
no.
you just went back to have another look.
Yeah, I pretended to read a book at the bookstore.
So from that day to you getting married, how long was that?
So we got engaged the following February.
Yes.
And then we got married the following June.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how many months did you have to wait from hearing God to him asking you out?
6 months.
6 months. So you just waited patiently.
Yeah, I just waited. I mean, to be honest, I needed time. I felt I needed a bit more time. So Nick kind of caught up very quickly at one point and then decided she was going to ask me out. And I, at that point, thought, oh gosh, I wasn't expecting that. You know, I thought we were going to just develop a friendship because I didn't say anything. I mean, the only person who knew about it was my sister.
Yeah.
And also I was only 24 and I'd come from quite a sort of very secular feminist background. And so to walk into a church and feel like everyone wanted to marry me off, I was like, no, that's not going to work. No. But hilariously, God did want to marry me off. So that was quite
you did
funny.
get married.
I did.
You ended up together going to Zimbabwe and ministering there. How many years were you in Zimbabwe?
6 years.
6 years. And was that a good season?
It was wonderful. We absolutely loved it. You know, so the Twickenham years, we were there for 3 years. That was hard for all of us, hard for my uncle and my aunt. My uncle was very ill. Yeah. I wasn't very well. I had 2 pregnancies and a miscarriage. And Nick was really snowed under. You know, it was hard years, I felt, but took their toll on us as a young couple, young married couple. And we felt that God had kind of gifted us Zimbabwe. I mean, I'd have loved to have stayed near my parents with little children, I really would. But God gave us this beautiful family, a church family, you know, and I had all these amazing women who would share my experience of having children, and we had I had a mum's play group and Bible study groups, and we just saw God do so much. And
tell us about the miracle of the lettuce.
Oh, the lettuce. Yeah, I love the lettuce.
What happened there?
Well, we were expecting the Archdeacon for lunch. We didn't actually have a lot of money in Zimbabwe. We were well off compared to a lot of people. And the church was extremely generous to us, but a clergy stipend was not a lot. And we lived quite simply, and our meals were quite simple. And we had gardeners we lived on the church property, you know, and then we had a little garden and we grew tomatoes and we grew spinach and onions and things like that. So we had pasta and a tomato sauce and a bit of grated cheese for lunch for the Archdeacon. And I looked at it and I thought, I don't think that looks enough. I think we need a salad and bread or something.
Yeah, need to supplement it.
Yes. So it just didn't look enough. It didn't feel like hospitality to me. So I said to Nick, I'm just going to pop down to the shops and I'm just going to pick up a lettuce. And so I drove down, and we had 2 supermarkets in the same shopping centre. And I went into one and there were no lettuces, and there wasn't even a cabbage. There was nothing to make coleslaw, nothing to make a salad. And I thought, oh, well, there'll be one at Bon Marche or whatever. So I went across to there. Bon Marché it's called, but we always used to call it Bon Marche.
Yes.
And nothing, absolutely nothing, no salad. And that would happen in Zimbabwe. You know, you never planned your meals the week ahead. You would go and see what was in the shops, and then you'd cook that. So I was a bit dejected, and I thought, oh, that's a shame. But never mind. And I went back home, parked the car, walked into the back door through the kitchen, and on the side there was this enormous freshly picked lettuce, still wet and with mud on the roots. And I said to Plucky, who was this wonderful woman who worked for us, I said, where did this come from, Plucky? She said, I don't know. Someone just must have put it in the kitchen. So she didn't even see anyone put it there. And so we had lettuce for our lunch with the Archdeacon.
I mean, talk about provision.
It was such a great story.
And a huge encouragement, isn't it?
It was so lovely.
The Lord does know our needs, and sometimes miraculously provides for them.
Yeah.
Now, you and Nick, obviously, you came back, you've ministered in different places. You call yourself a theology nerd, which basically means?
Well, when we were in Zimbabwe, before we went to Zimbabwe, I trained to be a lay minister in the Church of England, because I felt just after we married that God was calling me to a preaching ministry, and Nick and Martin very sweetly affirmed that and encouraged me to pursue that. So I did the training, and I was preaching quite a lot in Zimbabwe, which I loved, and I still love preaching. And I was listening to Nick preach, and we actually had one of the ex-rectors in our church, Hugh Williams, who was a wonderful man and also wonderful preacher. And I felt I didn't really know enough. I thought, if I'm preaching God's word to God's people, I think I need to know more.
Yeah.
And so I started studying theology, and the more I studied, the more I studied. So, I think what happened was that I sort of reconnected to a younger self, where I was an academic. I'd left, didn't do English because it didn't have my heart, but I did like study. I do like studying. I love it. I love reading. I love thinking about ideas. I love writing. And I discovered this whole side of me in my 40s.
And you ended up becoming a principal.
Yes, I did.
Of Westminster
Theological Centre.
Theological Centre. And how long were you the principal there for?
Well, I got a job to help them out because the previous principal resigned and they needed a hand. And I literally, honestly, I said, I'll help. And but as the months went by, again, I felt God speaking to me, and I felt him giving me a real vision for WTC and a real gift of faith for it, because we actually didn't have much money. We had lost quite a lot of our partners when the principal resigned. And a lot of people, I think, thought that I had been drafted in to close it down. And I felt that God had told me that I had been drafted in to make it work.
Yes.
So I listened to him, and over the first few weeks and months that I was there helping out as the Dean of Studies, that was the job they gave me, we got together a team, and we worked very hard to try and make it work. And then in June, so that was 2012, in June 2013, they appointed me as the principal.
And you did that for how many years?
So I did that for 12 and a half years, I think. I stepped down January.
And now
25.
You're the president.
Yes.
And the main focus of the centre is?
Well, mainly we teach validated theological degrees. So we have a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a certificate and a graduate diploma in Kingdom Theology. And it's all part-time. So it's designed for anybody. Anyone can come. Anyone can come, whether they're a Christian or not a Christian. But actually, all of our students, apart from one person came once who wasn't a Christian, which was lovely. Most of our students have a strong faith, and they want to get to know God better, to understand the Bible better, to understand their faith and the history of their faith. And sometimes for ministry, but not always. A lot of people who come to WTC are in kind of normal jobs, as I would say.
So how many students do you currently have? Does the centre have?
About 230, I think.
That's so encouraging.
Yeah, no, it is. It's lovely. It is, honestly, it's so lovely. And the culture and the atmosphere is very, very special. And I feel like we have wonderful teachers, who love the Lord.
Yes.
And love their subjects and believe in the life of the Spirit.
And so a lot of the people who, may have full-time jobs and aren't able to go into full-time education, you can adjust that.
Exactly.
And then
they can come and study. Exactly. So we've had people who literally, as you say, have full-time jobs.
Yes.
We had a young man who's a GP. We have people who are teachers, we have people who are carers, we have people who have PhDs in other subjects.
Yes.
We have all sorts of
All
people.
sorts.
All sorts.
But how encouraging, I mean, when you're thinking, maybe you're equipping 250 students a year, in 4 years you've equipped 1,000.
Yeah.
And that's so encouraging that over those years you've encouraged so many people.
And what I love is that they coming to study with us deepens people's faith.
Yes.
It deepens your knowledge of God, and then deepens your worship and your kind of awe and amazement at who he is.
Well, it's discovery, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's digging down more, isn't it?
Exactly.
And you find the diamonds, don't you?
Exactly.
They were always there.
Always there, yeah.
But,
it's just people helping you to uncover them. And then things you find out for yourself, because you do your own reading and your own praying. We encourage people to pray over their studies, and we have a lovely culture of prayer at WTC. We have worship in the morning and the evenings, and prayer ministry, and so it's very special.
Very. And you have written a number of books. Do you love writing?
I do, actually. Yeah.
Well, you're a very good writer.
Oh, thank
the
you,
Discipleship Course is so important, isn't it?
It is.
Discipleship.
Yeah, it is.
And I know often, we can get criticised. We're making converts and not discipling them.
Yeah.
So tell us about the course.
I wrote that course with a colleague of mine, Matt Lynch, who was a colleague. He's now works at Regent in Vancouver. He's a fantastic Old Testament scholar and a great friend of mine. We actually got asked to write that course by a man called Steve Abley, who is an evangelist. And he, like you were saying, J.John, he saw the gap. And he wanted to do mission and have something to put into people's hands for a sort of first step, kind of a post-alpha.
Yes.
Yeah. And he came to me and he said, Lucy, God's told me that you're the right person to do this.
Right.
I said, well, I'll just check in with him as well, just to check. But when you... he's lovely, and he asked to come. He said, "I'll come and meet you. I'll come to come and see you." And I didn't. When he said that, I didn't think, "Oh, I'm not sure."
Sure.
My leaning was to, I wonder if we are right, And then I proposed it to Matt, and Matt said, "Yeah, let's do it."
Yeah.
So we wrote it for Steve.
Because what's surprising, Lucy, is that there aren't many courses like this that I'm aware of.
No. I think that's right. I think that's still right.
Yes.
And we there's a church in South Korea that goes through. They order about 30
So
from a
really,
year.
Lucy, any church that wants to run a basic, basic, it sounds negative, but it's not negative.
No, it's not negative.
It's like first steps, discipleship course.
Yeah.
You don't need to worry. Here it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I would love people to use it, and it's designed for a Christian who's sort of a bit ahead of the people that they're taking it through. But you don't need to be an expert. It's not for that. The information's in there. It's really someone facilitating, asking questions, hopefully kind of helping people to go a bit deeper on some of their issues that need praying through. Yeah, all of that.
All of that. Now, and then this book. On women, and fascinating. I really enjoyed dipping into this book.
Thank you.
Now, what prompted you to write this?
I had written a book called Women in Worship at Corinth, which was a rereading of 1 Corinthians 11 and 14, which have some very tricky passages, 2 tricky passages about women in them, and then one very difficult passage about Paul seemingly telling the Corinthians to not pray in tongues and prophesy instead, and it seems a bit contradictory at times. So I wrote a book about that. And then everyone kept asking me, they said, well, you've dealt with the head coverings idea and 1 Corinthians 14. But what do you think about 1 Timothy 2? And what do you think about all these things? And I said, well, I don't know. I mean, I had ideas, but...
Sure.
And then my good friend, Scott McKnight, Scott McKnight, along with Nick, sort of strongly encouraged me to write an easier, simpler version of Women in Worship at Corinth. And that was still only on 1 Corinthians 11.
Yes.
And then Scott said, you should write a bigger book, treating all the verses about women and men and God in the Bible, of which, as you can see, there aren't that many.
No.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes, there aren't many.
I think we tend to think, I think we tend to think there are lots, or that they're very sort of weighty. But actually, when you dig in...
And read them in their context.
Yes, exactly.
And the culture of that particular letter or epistle.
That's right. I mean, there's so much more in our Bible about the stories of women and the relationship of women to God. And there's so many more things than these little verses that we have. But nevertheless, they're in the Bible, and it's good for us to dig in and say, what do they mean? What might they mean for me today? And that's that book.
So tell me, Lucy, what's the conclusion? So all your research that you've endeavoured to do and remain neutral in your research, you have concluded that...
I've concluded that there are definitely verses in the Bible that can be read to give people the impression that women should be in some kind of submissive relationship to men.
Yes.
There are those verses. I think that reading those verses in their own context, as you said, in the letter, that they come in the New Testament, or perhaps in Genesis 1-3 or something like that, as well as reading those verses in the light of the whole of Scripture, the whole canon, and in the light of the whole of church history, and seeing what women who are called to do for God and how they do that, my conclusion is that God's desire is for men and women and children, girls and boys, to serve equally in his kingdom.
Yes.
In any capacity that he calls them to. That's my conclusion.
And you've been doing that in your own life and in ministry. And you're a speaker, you're a teacher, you're a writer, you're an equipper, you're a mentor. and I love your love of Jesus, and I love your love of the Bible and theology, Lucy.
Oh, thank you, J.John. Well, I'm a very privileged person, I think, to be able to do the things I love.
It's wonderful. Lucy, thank you so much for joining us on Facing the Canon.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely.
I hope you've enjoyed that conversation with Lucy. Yes, let's keep pursuing Jesus. Let's keep digging into his word. And if we've got time or can make time to study theology, let's do it. Thank you for joining us on Facing the Canon. Please join us again.